What is happening, people? We're back with another whiteboard lecture, and today we're going to talk about why I think the plank is the most, by far, overrated ab exercise that you could possibly do. I cannot, for the life of me, describe to you or even theorize to you why someone thinks this is the best option for ab training. I'm going to point out the flaws in terms of the force stuff related to this exercise first and the biomechanics, and then we're going to talk about other things that I would advise that you do to train your abs. Okay, now before we even break down the mechanics of this motion, just use your intuition here for a moment. Yes, this is my automatic cat feeder. Yes, I have 2 cats. If you were to train your spinal erectors, right, the things that straighten and arch your back, would you lie down and go like this? Would you try to shove your head into the ground like that? Or would you lie like this and then, you know, I'm trying to hold the mic, but would you dig your shoulders into the ground so that you could do a reverse plank? Hopefully not. So why should the abs be different? Well, they should not, at least in my opinion. So let's go over the forces and describe what's actually happening here. So if we assume, okay, so this person probably needs some hands or something, right? So here's the elbow, forearm, hand. Hopefully that orientation is clear. Knee, you know, ankle, feet, whatever. What are the forces? What are the contacts of this exercise, by the way? Well, we just look at, okay, the ground, what's touching the ground? Okay, so let's just assume that the main contact here is somewhere through the elbow, and that force is pushing upward like that. And on the other end over here, we have the ground pushing upward through the floor. So if you think about this, just, you know, you again, use your intuition, you ask yourself, okay, what is the ground rather doing to the foot, and what is the ground doing to the elbow, or really the arm? Well, if you think about just putting your hands like this and imagine the floor was here, the ground is essentially just shoving your arms like this. And as it shoves your arms like this, what it's doing is it's arching you back, right? You just imagine your arms are straight and someone were pushing your spine backward, right? They would be arching your spine. So what do you have to do against that? You have to kind of do a crunch. Okay, we have some ab loading. We'll talk about the problems with this in a second, of course. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, what's happening at the foot? Well, just picture what muscles you would need to recruit to kick something, right? That's essentially what's happening. If you were to kick something, right, muscles here, your quads, and then your muscles here, your hip flexors would have to prevent that from happening. So there's a force here and there's a force here. Now, where are the problems introduced insofar as training the abs is actually concerned? Well, if you've ever heard of something called moment arm or the word torque, moment arm and torque basically tell us what the actual resistance of an exercise is beyond force. So I'm just saying, okay, here's a force, but that's not what our joints are actually experiencing. Our joints experience something called torque. I talk about this every single day in my mentorship. Link in the description to check out my mentorship. But it's something that's so pivotal to understand when it comes to exercise. So what do we actually do to determine torque in this context? I'm very glad you asked. Well, we draw a line, a perpendicular 90-degree line from the direction of force to the relevant segments. Now, if you know what the abs are, and specifically the six-pack is the most trained ab in this context, the abs basically connect the rib cage to the pelvis, and what they do is they move the spine, right? They crunch the spine down, they side bend the spine, and they rotate the spine. But in this context, we're basically talking about a straight forward to backward thing. So anyway, if we're trying to determine load on the abs, what we have to do is draw, hopefully this different color, there we go, a line like this. And I'm drawing it above the line of the spine here so as to not overlap them. But what you would really do is you would really draw it in the way that it intersects those joints. So really the joints we're talking about when we're talking about a crunching type motion are these joints right here in the lower spine. Okay, so just hold that in your head, hold that in your brain for now. And then we're going to look at moment arms from the opposite direction. Okay, so here's the moment arm from the force here to the knee. Here's the moment arm from the force of the foot to the hip, right? And this is how you would lay it out. So we have some amount of knee load, some amount of hip load, some amount of spine load. And what is the obvious freaking problem here? And by the way, we haven't even talked about shoulder load, but we can leave that aside for just a second. Well, if we're looking at the knee and the hip, okay, look at how long these lines are. Does it make sense to have lines that are this long, moment arms that are this long? Does it make sense to deal with all of this torque when it comes to trying to train the abs? Or does it just make more sense to basically remove this stuff from the equation and to just find a way to basically try to load our spine more directly? That would make more sense to me as an exercise selection for training this specific thing. And even if we wanted to say, oh, okay, these lines, they're not actually a problem. Well, look at the discrepancy here between this line, the green, and this line, the blue. In other words, the blue line being longer than the green line indicates that there's actually more resistance on your hips than your lower spine. In other words, the segments which would actually be loading the abs. So here we have an interesting scenario where we're literally loading our hip joints more than our spine joints. And a lot of people experience this and then get gaslighted into thinking that like they're just doing the exercise wrong. They have to basically do 20 different workarounds and cues and squeezing and exhaling to feel their abs in the first place, when in reality we could simply just pick another exercise. Now, much in the same way that these lines exist, the line to the shoulder, even though the direction of force is going straight through the shoulder, it is shoving the shoulders backward, right? So for instance, if you're a personal trainer or coach and you have, say, an overweight client who's never been able to do, say, a pressing motion with their body weight, why would it be a good idea to assume that their shoulders would be cool with this? I mean, it's not like all of a sudden their shoulders are just going to explode, but I can't tell you the amount of times that people get done with planks, and this is just what I hear when I'm walking by trainers who are forcing their clients to do this. Their clients get up and they're like, you see them like, and people make the argument. They say, oh, Ben, it's not a big deal. You can just stabilize the knee, the hips, and the shoulder. Like, this is what stability is for. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to train our shoulders? Are we trying to train our hips? Are we trying to train our knees? Are we trying to train our toes? No, we're trying to train our abs. Okay, so now is the section of the video where I basically just will say, here's how to train your abs. So actually training the abs is remarkably simple. And when it comes to, I'll just stay on the topic of six-pack here because we could talk for 10 hours about how to train the obliques as differently from the rectus abdominis. If you're interested in that, I obviously have information on that in my mentorship. Link in the description. But the basic premise is this, right? So here is a person, okay? And, here is their cervical spine, here's their neck, here's their thoracic spine, here's their lumbar spine, and, kind of looks like a balloon actually, and here's their pelvis. And basically how to train the spine, right? Or I said the wrong thing there, but it is going to make sense. How to train the abs is that you move the spine, right? So if I'm going to shorten the abs, contract them, what has to happen is the spine has to round over. This is over exaggerated, obviously, but I have to do some kind of crunch. And then if I'm going to lengthen my abs, I need to do the opposite. I need to arch my back. So I don't know, maybe this is now a plant or something, or 3 balloons, whatever you prefer. And basically all we need is a loading direction that is anchored to somewhere on the higher sort of side of the spine. So normally this could be, something like you holding a rope, for instance, behind you, and the cable is going backward, where the cable at every point would be anchored maybe somewhere up close, to your neck, and it would be driving you this way. And because it's driving you this way, in other words, because you have a load here that is pulling you into an arch, you need something behind you to use as an anchor to crunch against, a counterforce it's known as. So I like to put any counterforce kind of in this zone down here behind the pelvis or behind the lower back. And when you do that, you basically just give yourself a really stable support off of which to perform the crunch. So for example, my go-to movement for this could be something as simple as sticking your ass up against a cable stack, grabbing a handle, putting it on your head, or grabbing a rope, putting it around your sides, and just doing a crunch and actually training flexion and extension. You don't have to worry about your shoulders. You don't have to worry about your hips. You don't have to worry about your knees. You don't have to worry about your toes. You don't have to worry about trying to protract and squeeze and exhale and do all these magical, mystical things with the floor. You just simply arch and round, and arch and round and arch and round. And that's the magic of understanding exercise physics, is that we don't have to make guesses. We can just understand, okay, what has to happen in order for this tissue to respond, in order for this tissue to contract. And guess what? You could do the exact same thing just from a kind of opposite direction. So rather than crunching from top down, you perhaps could do something like a hanging leg raise. A variation of this I love is where you put actually a barbell behind the back, and you basically just tuck your pelvis and untuck your pelvis. And as you're doing this, so as to eliminate the hip involvement, you can keep your hips in a kind of static position and basically just tuck your butt and untuck your butt like you're a dog taking a shit or something similar. And this is another fantastic option. It's a lot more of a kind of high bar in terms of how challenging it is, but there are other ways to do it. For instance, you could do like a reverse gar hammer or something similar. You can Google what that is if you don't know what that is. So overall, I hope this is clear. When we're picking exercises for different muscle groups, we want to make it super easy to challenge the target tissue. We also don't want to, unless we are in some kind of exceptional scenario, at least most of the time, we don't want to train muscles to grow them and make them stronger with only isometrics. This idea, this concept that the abs are a special mystical muscle group that must be trained isometrically, the core, right, is a totally baseless claim. If you want to get better at something like deadlifts, if you want to get better at something like squats, well, you need to do more exercises that actually challenge the specific muscles of those exercises, neither of which predominantly are the abs. The abs are heavily involved in creating a brace, of course, but those exercises you're much better off training your erectors for, right, and actually doing the motions themselves. That's the best way to get better at doing those motions, is doing more of those motions and getting those motions stronger and bringing up the muscles, in that case, like the erectors, that would actually allow you to, improve that kind of motion. And guess what? Training your abs in this non-isometric traditional way is probably the fastest way to actually improve stability if there were such a concept. So don't treat the abs differently. Don't assume that they're distinct in that, instead of actually moving through a range of motion like every single other muscle group in the body, we shouldn't do the same for them. That's nonsense. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean, by the way, and this is, a lot of people won't make it to the end of the video, so they won't hear me say this, unfortunately, and then we're going to see all these comments angrily attacking me, where people will say, oh, the plank worked for me, or I love planks, or my clients love planks. That's great. I'm happy for you. I'm glad that that's a thing. The point of this video was not to say, although it kind of probably came off this way, don't do planks. It's more that if your goal is to train and grow your abs and get your abs stronger and get your abs bigger, what you should do is you should use exercises that make sense for that muscle group. If you really like these super deep dives, you're gonna absolutely love the mentorship I've been talking about at various points. Check the link in the description. I'll see you all in the next video.